people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Okay, we'll start with this. We now know who newly crowned WBA lightweight champion Stephanie Han is going to be facing this summer in July in El Paso, Texas at the Coliseum as the main event of a King's Promotion show. She's going to be facing Bexy Mateus. You may be familiar with that name. That's the same Bexy Mateus that Lauren Price knocked out not but 1 or 2 fights ago. 29 years old to Stephanie Han, who's 34, sporting an unblemished record of 10 wins with no losses, no draws, 3 knockouts to Bexy Mateus, sports a professional record of 8 wins with 1 loss, no draws, 7 knockouts, having been knocked out once in 9 professional bouts. Bexy is a scrapper, through and through, and so is Stephanie Han, though a bit more well-rounded, at least more than Bexy, more well-schooled, and so you can expect a scrap. Chippy affair. Bexy is capable enough to make Stephanie Han work for it, but beatable enough that Stephanie's not in over her head in what will be her maiden title defense, her first defense of the WBA title since becoming champion, a necessary cog in the lightweight picture, one of 4 champions there. There is Stephanie holding the WBA, Caroline Dubois holding the WBC, Terry Harper holding the WBO, and Beatrice Ferreira holding the IBF. So long as Stephanie Han has that WBA title, she is one of the somebodies in this division, and she's spoken for, at least for the next 2 or 3 months. The same applies to Terry Harper. She's got a fight coming up in her native Doncaster, the fight with Natalie Zimmerman, and that's towards the tail end of this month, on the 23rd. Then Stephanie will be returning to action 2 months later in July, the fight with Bexy. Bexy can push her, and Bexy can make her work, but it is a winnable fight. Winnable enough that Stephanie may remain champion a while longer. And if she does, she has the option of pursuing a Terry Harper fight as opposed to some of the other fights, the other unification matches, because compared to those unification matches, the Terry Harper fight is a little bit more winnable. That doesn't make it easy. Just more winnable than the others. You could give Stephanie better odds against Terry than you could give her against Beatrice or Caroline. Why? Well, those are well-schooled amateurs. Those are Olympians, not just world champions, whereas Terry, in spite of being experienced as a professional, she doesn't have the same amateur background than they do. And Terry's been knocked out 2 times already. She's been stopped before. So if Stephanie can get in with a meaty right hand, maybe she can get her out of there too. I'm not saying it's a lock. No, it's not a guarantee that Stephanie wins. It's just more winnable than the other fights. Same logic applies to Terry. That fighting Stephanie compared to fighting Beatrice or compared to fighting Caroline, fighting Stephanie, that's a more winnable fight. So maybe they both decide to go in each other's direction beyond their upcoming fights. It's one way it might break down. It's also important to note that Beatrice Ferreira has a fight coming up as well as part of an MVP show, Most Valuable Promotion show. It's my understanding that she's still with Matchroom, but she's going to do a one-off with them. So there's definitely movement at 135 pounds, but it could be a while longer before these champions start to take on each other. And that's what really needs to happen, is none of the 4 champions at 135 are popular enough to just stand alone, apart from the others. To crown a queen, they have to unify. It's the only way. A big part of the boom in women's boxing was that their fights were comparatively easier to make than what you get from the men. Less marination, more action. And for the sport to continue to grow, that has to continue. They have to fight. Men's super bantamweight news. Former unified champion Mudajan Akhmadaliev is set to return later on this month on the 30th ahead of an Inoue showdown in September. More incentive for him to not only make it through, but look the part, as he is on the eve of the biggest fight of his career. Bigger than when he became champion. Oh, this is much bigger than the Daniel Roman fight was. Murodjon Akhmadaliev will have to wait a few months for his dream fight, but only a few weeks for his next ring appearance. Boxing Scene has confirmed that the former unified super bantamweight champion is set to return to the ring May 30th. Akhmadaliev, 13-1 with 10 knockouts, will face Luis Castillo on the DAZN undercard headlined by the Manuel Gallegos Khalil Co. rematch from Domo Alcalde in Guadalajara, Mexico. With a win. Next up for the Uzbek Southpaw is a September 14th showdown with undisputed super bantamweight champion Naoya Inoue. The meeting is contingent upon victories by both fighters. Inoue successfully defended the undisputed crown this past Sunday against San Antonio's Ramon Cardenas. Now Murodjon has to hold up his end of the bargain. Placement on the May 30th show is means for Akhmadaliev to remain active ahead of the biggest fight of his career. He has not fought since a third-round knockout of Tijuana's Ricardo Espinoza last December in Monte Carlo, Monaco. The feat came with the interim WBA Super Bantamweight title. The secondary belt was a consolation prize for Akhmadaliev, reluctantly agreeing to allow Inoue to further delay his overdue WBA mandatory shot. Akhmadaliev hadn't fought in exactly 52 weeks prior to that fight, partly because he was ensured that a title shot was in tow. He withdrew from a Plant Stay Busy fight last summer as a result, but in the end was just left with a year nearly gone to waste. Jake Donovan wrote this article, formerly of Ring Magazine, now he's back over at Boxing Scene, and you have to be careful how these boxing scribes put a story together because it's not always accurate. Where Jake says that Murodjon's title shot was overdue, no it wasn't. Murodjon was the last in the rotation. Luis Nery as a mandatory had to be satisfied before him, and Sam Goodman after that. We all know what happened with Sam. All of those postponements. To where if the WBA jumps the gun and orders the MJ fight prematurely, that doesn't make it overdue, that makes them ahead of schedule. Made them ahead of schedule. But now it's almost time. The return to the ring later this month is a means to avoid history repeating itself. Akhmadaliev previously held the WBA and IBF Super Bantamweight titles. His 3-year reign ended in April of 2023, when he dropped a highly questionable split decision to Marlon Tapales. Inoue, the unified WBC and WBO champion at the time, went on to defeat Tapales via 10th round knockout to become a 2-time undisputed champion and a 4-weight champion overall. Akhmadaliev has fought just twice since the loss to Tapales. 1 year prior to the above-mentioned win over Espinoza, Akhmadaliev defeated then unbeaten Kevin Gonzalez via 6th-round knockout in December of 2023 to become the WBA's mandatory. And I suppose that he's feeling very good about himself now that Naoya Inoue looked a bit more human than usual this past Sunday, and he is about to fight him. All he's got to do is take care of this Castillo guy, then he's headed for the big time. In my previous video, I talked about how I expect the MJ Akhmadaliev fight to be perhaps the most difficult fight of Inoue's Super Bantamweight campaign. More difficult than the Stephen Fulton fight, and more difficult than the Marlon Tapales fight, as MJ Akhmadaliev is a more well-schooled amateur than both. Then how did Marlon beat him? Well, that's the thing. It's questionable whether or not Marlon actually beat him fair and square. He got the decision, but as we all know, the boxing community at large doesn't always agree with the judge's decision. And to me, that fight was close enough that you could have given it to MJ, but they gave it to Marlon. That as the reigning champion and the house fighter on what was a Matchroom show, maybe MJ didn't get enough consideration, or as much consideration as some other fighters in that same situation. I'm not saying it wasn't competitive, and I'm not saying Marlon robbed MJ. I'm just saying that MJ won that fight more than Johnny Fisher beat Dave Allen. Put it that way.
You got it?
That if you can give Johnny Fisher a gift in the Dave Allen fight, for example, then MJ could have got that same kind of gift. That's what I mean. But it's all water under the bridge and lint in the foreskin now.
What?
Change in the couch cushions. It's in the past, and bigger bouts lie ahead.
After what you saw on Sunday, do you still feel Inoue beats this guy? Are you still confident?
Now, while I think MJ Akhmadaliev will pose a serious challenge to Inoue, and we know that MJ is up for it, given that Inoue has his fair share of experience against southpaws, like Mutajan.
Remember, Michael Das Marinas was a southpaw. Marlon Tapales was a southpaw. Luis Neri was a southpaw. TJ Doheny.
Seen his fair share of southpaws, like Mutajan Akhmadaliev. Evaluating Sunday's performance, some may rush to the conclusion that that early scare was a negative. I look at it as a wake-up call, the kind of wake-up call he needs against a formidable adversary. You can't take your eyes off the ball for a second.
You had to be on your P's and Q's with a Ramon Cardenas, and so you definitely have to be on your P's and Q's with a Mutajan Akhmadaliev.
So I expect Inoue to respect this guy from the opening bell. I expect Inoue to respect him, his boxing ability, his amateur background, to not be cavalier.
I expect to see a lot of jab work from Inoue, and a jab with speed behind it is very difficult to counter.
Distance control, MJ Akhmadaliev is comparatively shorter and stumpier than Inoue. Doesn't have as much ring coverage.
Though still capable, still formidable.
He's gonna go for it, and that's where staying on the balls of your feet, bouncing in and out of striking distance, using a jab the whole time is pivotal.
It sets everything else up.
After that scare on Sunday, I'm expecting a more switched-on Inoue in September.
Against a more formidable adversary, I'm expecting a great fight.
As it pertains to Inoue, and some of the hate he's receiving in some quarters, some circles, small ones.
The genius that said Inoue has a glass chin, I've been saying that he's overrated and overhyped. To that, former champion Ishe Smith responded, "Your logic would suggest my good friend and mentor Diego Corrales was overrated and overhyped. Didn't have the best of chins, but was an absolute killer in the ring. To suggest a fighter getting dropped makes them overrated or overhyped is asinine.
Especially when you're talking about a fighter at his fourth weight.
Sooner or later, it happens to most. You know who it happened to? It happened to a young Cassius Clay in the Sonny Banks fight. He got caught coming in with a left hook, just like Inoue did. Was he overrated and overhyped?
If that same knockdown would have happened in this postmodern era of boxing, that's what some of these would-be analysts would have said about Cassius.
And that shows what they know.
Fighter and friend to the channel, the voluptuous Sulem Urbina asked, why does the monster get so much hate? He's so good for boxing.
Is prejudiced against foreigners. That's the short answer. It's ugly, and it's an uncomfortable conversation to have, but when you see these hypercritical individuals of Inoue, that's what it stems from. They're bigots.
They do not like the idea that a fighter of Asian descent is getting this much attention within the American boxing sphere. They feel that attention should be going to other fighters, particularly the ones that they identify with, even when they're not as proven as Inoue.
Veteran boxing scribe Al Berenstein of the Berenstein Bears said, "The ignorance that some fans show regarding Inoue is staggering to me. Anyone who knows anything about the sport should be able to see he is a mechanically sound fighter with great power and the grit and courage to engage in all his fights. If he beats Akhmadaliev in the next fight, he will be able to say he's beaten all the best fighters in 4 weight classes."
What is your first mistake, Al? You think that these guys are talking about boxing.
They're not.
No, they're just using boxing as the vehicle for their bigotry and their tribalism. I said it in my previous video. They hate everybody that isn't them. They hate me, they hate you, they hate the Latino fighters like they hate the Japanese fighters. They also hate the Asians.
Don't forget the Brits. They hate them too. They hate everyone that isn't them.
Here's an example. The same guy who this past Sunday was saying that Inoue is overrated and overhyped.
The champ side guy.
He made up a story that Inoue pulled out of the Stephen Fulton fight with an injury. He literally manufactured a narrative to slander Inoue. He went as far as saying that Inoue versus Fulton is a mismatch. Cool Boy is going to wash him.
He didn't.
He said, watch, Fulton versus Inoue is going to look like Stevenson versus Yoshino.
It didn't.
Same guy who 2 years later is telling you that Inoue is overrated and overhyped is the same guy that picked Stephen Fulton to beat him, except Stephen didn't beat him. Here's where it gets even more interesting. He's still high on Stephen Fulton. He still promotes and endorses Stephen while still castigating and tearing down Inoue.
Because this is not about boxing. This is not about Inoue proving that he can beat a slick American fighter. This is not about sport. This is about bigotry.
These are not good faith arguments that a champ side, for example, is making. The issue is not as he presents it, because he has no issue with Inoue's boxing. Inoue's boxing is fine, better than Stephen Fulton's, and you're okay with Stephen, so why are you not okay with Inoue? It's not the boxing.
It's his nationality. It's his race.
So that if anybody did to Stephen Fulton what you're doing to Inoue, you're gonna be the first to stand on a pulpit and call out the bigotry, call out the racism, but that's what you're doing.
You're projecting.
To live out some sort of sick fantasy where you turn the whip on the slave masters. You're trying to turn the tables, except this is not the Jim Crow era. You're not a freedom fighter. This is not a civil rights issue.
You only look at everything through that lens because you're unintelligent.
Unreasonable. And perhaps this is more time than someone as bigoted and ignorant as a champ side deserves from this channel, but if you want to get to the bottom of it, why does it seem like there are some people within the American boxing sphere that have an axe to grind with Inoue? What has this guy ever done that anybody should be so hypercritical of him?
So he was born.
He was born to a different ethnicity and a different race than those who are castigating him, because underneath it all, that's what their real problem is.
You talk to these guys, you're not talking boxing anymore, because if we're talking about boxing, just boxing, it's very easy to understand why so many people praise Inoue and why they rank him as a pound-for-pound fighter. It's self-explanatory, but it doesn't register with them because they're not talking about boxing.
They're never talking about boxing because they don't know shit about it. That's why he thought Stephen Fulton was gonna wash Inoue.
And I'm pretty sure he thought Errol was gonna wash Terrence.
You're not gonna get a good faith argument out of any one of these guys. Nothing they do is in good faith.
Nothing they say.
And it would be better to not say anything to them at all. Don't mince words with these guys. There's no point. But when I see so many within the boxing community befuddled by this undue hate that Inoue is getting, it needs to be said, that's why he's getting it. Prejudice against foreigners. From a small substrata of radical and hyper-xenophobic individuals within the American boxing sphere that hate anyone, everyone, that isn't them.
So once you have that understanding, you'll understand that there's no point in arguing. There's no middle ground for a debate or a dialogue.
You hate everybody because you're miserable. There ain't no fixing that.
You go see a therapist, not a boxing match.
It's an inferiority complex at its base that requires constant validation, even when it's undue, even when it's undeserved. Otherwise, this is what you end up with.
Undue hate.
Though still not a big deal, because this is a substrata within a substrata, and there are not enough of these guys to make the fighters they do like worth any goddamn thing.
That's why they're always complaining.
Now, this is more of an online phenomena than anything else online, where everything is free and everybody's got an opinion.